But where did all this start? Digital records show that it started all the way back in 2001, where we find an interview with Warren Whitfield by Rosemary Block, recorded at the State Library of New South Wales, Friday, 7th of September of that year. Rosemary Block was then National President of the Oral History Australia Association, retiring in 2007. In this interview, Mr. Warren Whitfield makes a number of unsubstantiated yet testable claims relevant to this exploration of the digital footprint of Guring-gai tribal link. I will list them in the order they appear. 1. That Warren Whitfield is an Aboriginal person. To date, Mr. Warren Whitfield has not been able to confirm this, and there's overwhelming evidence to suggest his Aboriginality is a fantasy of his own design. Mr. Whitfield displays less familiarity with Aboriginal culture and/or customs than the average Australian public school child today. And what he does know, he openly admits that he learned from non-Aboriginal sources. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that, unless you're claiming that you know these things through other means. Well, unless you're claiming to be Aboriginal, to be carrying on traditions and culture passed down through culture. There is a significant difference between being a non-Aboriginal history buff, an enthusiast, even an ally, and being an Aboriginal man. Yet Warren Whitfield does not seem to know or care about this. That his family did not know what tribe they were initially. Initially is doing some really heavy lifting. Mr. Whitfield learned the label Guring-gai had been applied to the language of the Broken Bay clan by a non-Aboriginal man in the 1970s. Mr. Whitfield then began to pass this off as genuine culture, passed down through his family in the 1990s. That a Sophie was part of the Walkaloa clan. There is a single historical record of a Sophie in the location and time Mr. Whitfield claims there's a record of his supposed great-great-grandmother. The 1831 blanket list mentioned by Mr. Whitfield does mention a Central Coast Aboriginal woman, possibly named Sophie, recorded on that list with no surname and no family background. An unrelated entry in the same document mentions a neighbouring people with the post-colonisation clan name Bongaree Nora Blacks, who sometimes visit the area. This single document is the entire basis for which Mr. Warren Whitfield and subsequent Guring-gai affiliates claim bloodline descent from Bongaree. Bongaree Nora Blacks is a post-colonisation clan name only. It does not refer to Bungaree's actual clan or family. It never did, and no historian claims it does. The term was not applied in the document to Sophie, and it does not in any way indicate that Bungaree was the parent of Central Coast Aboriginal woman Sophie. No members of Bungaree's confirmed family or mob are listed in this 1831 Brisbane Waters blanket list, and Bungaree's genuine family are very well accounted for elsewhere in this same period. Number 3, that this is what they now call the Guring-gai tribe. This phrasing is extremely reminiscent of the repeated, unsourced and unfounded claims made regarding this same group by Dr. Jeff Ford in his 2010 thesis. As with many claims in pseudoscience and related endeavours, it's not clear who they are. With certainty, I can say the only person leaving any sort of digital footprint discussing Guring-gai, Walkaloa, and claiming unfounded descent from my ancestors in this time period appears to be Mr. Warren Whitfield. 4. Bungaree had a son named Little Dick. This is false, but without divulging anything I do not have the cultural authority or relevant permissions to divulge, I can say with absolute certainty that there is no culturally recognised or otherwise recognised record of my ancestor, Bungaree, having a son named Little Dick. This is despite avid contributions of suspect data in genealogy websites by various Guring-gai family members and associates. The reality is that Bungaree had 2 wives, as was the style of the time. There are confirmed children of Bungaree and Matara from ample cross-linking of historical records. These 4 children are 1. Biddy Salamander, my apical ancestor. 2. Bowen. 3. Toby. And 4. Guring, aka Dinah or Diana. Boyo, aka Long Dick, is unconfirmed but believed to possibly be a son of Bungaree's through his second wife, Karoo. Bungaree had 2 daughters. The first, Biddy, is the daughter of Bungaree, born approximately 1803. The second, Guring, or Diana, is Biddy's half-sister, Bungaree's adopted half-European daughter of Matura, born circa 1808. Neither of these 2 daughters of Bungaree had Bungaree as their surname. This is a European invention that has been misapplied since the year 2001 by various Guring-gai affiliates. There never was a Sophie, long-lost daughter or granddaughter or niece of Bungaree. There is only Sophie, the Aboriginal woman who in 1831 was at Broken Bay and today is still being treated like a fetishized pawn of greedy white people on the Central Coast and northern beaches of Sydney. Subsequent data available online regarding the alleged Sophie Bungaree has all been planted by Guring-gai Tribal Link Aboriginal Corporation family members and friends. All of this post-2001 and never once presented with any evidence at all to support these false claims. That Walkaloa clan was or is Brisbane Waters mob. False. Mr. Whitfield is again misapplying terms that he has sourced from white historians, misapplying them to real people in order to backfill his fraudulent narrative. Starting from the conclusion and working backwards is not how science or research of any sort should take place. That the official records are irrelevant, as it's our family oral history, and we know that James Webb raped Sophie. Convenient for Mr. Whitfield, but not true, particularly when there is considerable evidence from both Aboriginal people and non-Aboriginal historians conflicting and contrasting Mr. Whitfield's baseless claims. It would be more accurate for Mr. Whitfield to say records that contrast his fiction are irrelevant to him. That Mr. Warren Whitfield knew Bungaree was buried somewhere. I'm 100% certain that at least partial remains of most historic figures are buried somewhere. That historian Keith Vincent Smith was the one who told Mr. Warren Whitfield the location of Bungaree's gravesite. I remain 100% confident Mr. Warren Whitfield cobbled together his pseudo-Aboriginal narrative using a variety of non-Aboriginal academics' work And I'm willing to accept Mr. Warren Whitfield's repeated admissions that historian Keith Vincent Smith was the one who gave him some of this information. That Bungaree was buried in a coffin, which had since been dug up. There is no evidence that this happened, thankfully. What is evident, however, is how comfortable Mr. Whitfield is describing the disturbance and desecration of the resting place of my ancestor and his supposed revered ancestor. Personally, I feel a deep sense of unease. A real chill runs through me just hearing about this supposed event, even reading about it now again. There are very clear cultural understandings in regards to resting places, and Mr. Whitfield demonstrates a fundamental ignorance of these vital components of genuine Aboriginal culture. That all the old people are dead now, long dead. I've no way of knowing the current state of whoever Mr. Whitfield claims his old people were. I'm fascinated to find that in 2001 they were all dead, long dead, which is a direct contradiction of later claims by Tracey-lee Howie and her associates for over 2 decades now. That Warren Whitfield's mother and father taught him how to get bush food. This is a very common experience for many Australian children, especially if they're fortunate enough to live in an area rich in natural beauty. It's not indicative of Aboriginality. On the contrary, ensuring that this part of his narrative is expressed in the interview, Mr. Whitfield appears to be demonstrating a very non-Aboriginal racialised perception of what it means to be Aboriginal. Mr. Whitfield goes on to claim that back in 2001, he'd already made plans to advertise for anyone who believes they're descendants of the Walkaloa people to come together and make some sort of organisation. He also admits that he discovered his believed ties to Bungaree only 4 years prior to the date of recording, so in 1997. Not through family, not through stories that were passed down, but from a non-Aboriginal source, from a white historian. Mr. Whitfield goes on to say he believed Mr. James Ashby, his ancestor, was a nice man, which Mr. Whitfield knows because in some of the records it said that the only conviction he has was for stealing a watermelon, and he was let off because he was a nice man. This claim's only notable in that it demonstrates Mr. Whitfield's over-reliance on records and non-Aboriginal sources to provide these supposedly handed-down family stories. Mr. Whitfield finally claims that it's a great honour for us to have his, Bungaree's, blood running through our veins. Indeed it is. For genuine confirmed descendants who observe and follow genuine Aboriginal culture. For Mr. Whitfield, it appears to have just been the spark of an idea that he and subsequent others would fraudulently use to bask in the cultural equivalent of racist stolen valour. Mr. Whitfield was only interested in my ancestor, Bungaree, and with our genuine Aboriginal family in order to make a living for himself, pretending to be anything other than another mediocre, non-Aboriginal person, profiting from the suffering of people he will never understand. Oh, and Mr. Warren Whitfield also has a tattoo of an Aboriginal flag on his forearm, and of course it has Guring-gai written on it. He's not the first to make this mistake. As Dr. Chelsea Wadigo has pointed out in her seminal work, another day in the colony. I'll quote from that now. And if they aren't tattooing their skin with an Aboriginal flag, they'll get animals done that they've appointed totem status to. Some discover their hidden artistic skills using those damn cotton buds. Some learn to play the didgeridoo. Some adorn themselves with emu feather earrings and occasionally smear their face with ochre and feathers on their forehead to make their public profile more Indigenous-like. The colour and pattern, they're not located in anywhere in particular. Those dots do the work of screaming, "Look, an Aborigine!" I'll now quote Mr. Warren Whitfield. I was actually told there was a famous Aboriginal person by the name of Bungaree who came from Brisbane waters, the same area that we came from. We knew where we came from, so I started to research then. This person would have to be related. If he came from the same clan, he would have to be related. He would have to be a great uncle, or a cousin, or a cousin's cousin, or something. But he'd have to be related if he came from the same clan. There's no doubt about that. So we had to find out which way he was related. This from the interview in 2001 is a telling indictment of Guring-gai tribal link that now in 2023 they've still not been able to locate how they could possibly be related, my family or my ancestor, Bungaree. This interview with the founding father of so-called Guring-gai tribal link, Aboriginal Corporation, is the first recorded instance of what would come to be repeated, false, unsubstantiated, and transparently self-serving claims by successive directors, leaders, and collaborators with these individuals. This recording is the first ever instance of the entirely false claim that Bungaree was Guring-gai and/or Walkaloa. This recording is the first ever instance of the entirely false claim a Sophie was a relative of Bungaree, let alone a niece, let alone a granddaughter or a daughter. This recording is the first ever instance of the false claim that Bungaree had a son named Little Dick. Mr. Whitfield plainly states that he believed his clan was from the area and that Bungaree was from the area, so they had to be related. That's it. They just had to be. But at what cost? From this false conclusion, reached through cherry-picking of non-Aboriginal historians and their books, Mr. Whitfield worked backward to construct a narrative that bears no resemblance to reality, the central core of what would become sometimes known as Guring-gai tribal link. The interview reveals that Mr. Whitfield only discovered his believed connection to Bungaree in 1997. By his own account, Mr. Whitfield says the information was passed to him by a non-Aboriginal historian outside of his family. Side note, in the years following Warren Whitfield's invention of Sophie, daughter of Bungaree, and subsequent false narrative, many people have subsequently claimed Aboriginal descent from this so-called Webb-Ashby line. Aside from the directors of this organisation, it's not clear who, if any of these people, were genuinely taken in, and I deeply regret the pain caused by any believers of this deception only now starting to realise the truth. I regret having to inform that Guring-gai and its multitude of variants is a lie, an illusion. It's a long con, benefiting the small few at the top of the corporate enterprises. These people are not descendants of Bungaree. They're not descendants of Matura. Those are not the voices of my ancestors that they're hearing in their heads. And they have as much cultural authority and credibility as Ronald McDonald.